What we're going to do here today is what I call an energy transfer. And any of you not at all familiar with that? Okay, a few. So and I'm going to go tomorrow in my presentation, I'm going to bring a lot of these concepts, a lot of these spiritual concepts and what's happening in the world a bit more down to earth. Today we're talking about these ideas from a higher perspective. But what I want to say, for those of you who are completely unfamiliar, I represent the Flower of Life Institute. It's an organization we started some years ago, and it's spread out into a variety of different things now, from the events that we do in our local area in Michigan to Michaela and I travel and do events as well. And we put on an expo every year, usually in the fall. Any of you attend the expo this last one? Okay, great. Okay, awesome. Yeah, we'll see you there next year. So the expo is kind of a weekend intensive for adults, although we do have children there too sometimes. That is more of an intensive version of this, and then we have a kids program as well that we've been working on for a number of years, where we have an online webcast where kids all over the world join and interact with each other and make friends. And we also bring in teachers like Michaela and other people in these different backgrounds to teach the children about these fields of expertise and also to help develop their talents and to meet other kids who are having these kinds of experiences, as well as we put on a day camp once a year where kids and their parents fly in and we do a weekend intensive for them with different classes which are more hands-on. And the plan is the next couple of years to launch a year-round school for kids that'll start out initially as a virtual program, so an online classroom that'll be live with live teachers and kids around the world. So there are a lot of long-term plans that we have as the organization, and we're just barely getting started. Now, the foundation of all of what we were doing started about 2011-12, when I met, and some of you have probably seen Barb either in person or in YouTube videos, a friend of ours who is an aura reader, very gifted, and who told me some things about my energy field that made me contemplate that maybe I'm here for a reason and I need to explore that further, which I'm sure is true for many of you as well. If not all of you in this room, we'll explore that idea a bit tomorrow. And that prompted me to start doing these events for the intention of raising consciousness and removing the density that individuals, in particular light workers, carry in their energy field that prevent them from their full expression in this human experience. So that's what we're going to do here today. Now, but I want to explain the concept a little bit more so that you understand what's taking place, especially for those of you who are completely new. And I'll get into it a bit more in depth tomorrow. So we are entering this new dimensional space as a collective. We're going from this third dimensional space and awareness to eventually more of a fifth dimensional space and beyond. And at the moment, we're shifting into that fourth to fifth dimensional space. Now, many of you are already functioning from that fifth dimension, and some of you are already accessing even higher dimensions. So this doesn't necessarily apply to this room, but for the whole collective consciousness, not everybody has moved to fifth dimension yet. Many of the individuals outside of this room are still very much rooted in and experiencing a third dimensional reality. But as we move forward, the whole collective will eventually reach that space of fifth dimensional consciousness, and so will the whole Earth's the Earth consciousness as well. But what's happening in the interim is we've experienced this dimensional shift from third to this in-between place between third and fifth. And whenever we move, and I'll illustrate this tomorrow a little bit, whenever we move from one dimension to a higher dimension, what happens is more information becomes available to us. So that's, there was a question earlier about artificial intelligence, and there's a lot of concern among those of us who are a little bit more conscious than the mainstream of where these things are going and will they be used in ways that are not the most beneficial to the whole collective. And certainly this is a concern, and it's a valid concern, but it's important that we keep things in perspective, because we're moving into this period of time in the next several decades where the collective is awakening and accelerating at a very rapid pace. And as that happens, as this dimension continues to shift, we are going to have access to more information from the multidimensional universe. What that means is there is going to be artificial intelligence. It's already here. Each of you has it in your pocket right now. If you have a mobile phone and use Alexa or Siri, that's an artificial intelligence you're carrying around with you and you're using. It's beneficial to you if you use it. It's helpful. It helps you in your day-to-day life. But certainly the same technology can be used in a way that's not so beneficial to the collective, and that's also going on. But what we need to understand is what separates the use of these advancements, whether it be artificial intelligence or self-driving cars or whatever, whether it's used for positive or whether it's used in a way that, when I use the word negative, I don't mean bad, but just to illustrate the point, whether it's used for positive or negative really depends on the consciousness that's behind it. So those individuals who are developing these technologies, we don't know what their consciousness is. They may be third dimensionally based. They may be a higher dimensionally based. Some of them may be just like all of you in this room and are developing these technologies for altruistic reasons to benefit humanity in some way. And there may be others who are using it or developing it for use in the military so that we can fight wars more efficiently. Both exist, but the information that, in order to create those technologies, is present because of the dimension that we're in, which means they're not going away. They are very much a real part of our society, and they're going to continue to be in the future. But the real question is, will it benefit us? Will we be able to use it like we use our smartphones for navigating our way around town in a positive way that benefits us? Or will it be used in ways that are not so beneficial to the collective? And this is really a question of consciousness. At the moment, the Earth's consciousness is still fairly low, and although not so much in this room, those of you in this room are of a much higher consciousness, or you wouldn't be drawn to this. We are drawn to things that are of a similar vibration to who we are. So, and we'll delve into this a bit more tomorrow, but also the question came up earlier about when's disclosure going to happen, and many of us, and in the mainstream disclosure movement, and any of you watch Awake and Empowered TV, the show that okay. So I've interviewed a lot of people over the years. In the mainstream disclosure movement, there is this expectation that UFOs are going to land on the White House lawn and make themselves known. And this is what disclosure is. But disclosure is happening already. Michaela up here channeling the Pleiadians or whoever, that's disclosure. They're communicating through us and interacting with our society through the multidimensional aspects of ourselves. Now, I've worked very closely with people in the past several years who are Arcturian, who are hybrid children, who are Pleiadian, who are Mantis. These are human beings who look very human, but there is a very large aspect of themselves who are not human. So these beings are already here among us now, and they are interacting with us, and they're facilitating this move toward a higher consciousness. So disclosure is already here, and many of the technologies that we use and take for granted today are part of that disclosure movement. We asked for this. We asked for this time. In many ways, we're heading into somewhat of an Atlantean society in the next several decades. It's already begun. And so that means not only incredible advancements in technology, but also we will be living longer. We will have a lot more individuals such as yourselves who are going through awakening experiences. Many of the people I work very closely with who are making the transition from mainstream focuses in life to alternative spiritual healing or vibrational healing or light language or channeling or a number of those things are people who are coming from mainstream fields, medical doctors, nurses, Zane back there, a video game designer, if you would believe that, you know. So these are everyday people in everyday fields of life who are having awakening experiences, who are transitioning into a field that is anything but mainstream. So disclosure is already happening. It's happening through all of us. And what needs to happen, though, in order for us to move into this future where the whole collective consciousness can coexist in a fifth dimension, which it isn't right now. Many of you are able to contact and be in that dimension, but the whole collective isn't there yet. In order for that to occur, we have to move the whole of the earth consciousness there. So what separates whether Siri on your smartphone is used for your benefit and the benefit of humanity, or whether it's used in some negative way, is dependent on the consciousness that's present behind it. If the consciousness were to raise, then only good will come from it. If the consciousness were to stay low, then artificial intelligence will most certainly be used in an adverse way to the collective. If consciousness increases, then artificial intelligence will match that consciousness and will only be used for the benefit of humanity and the planet. So the only question that really remains is the consciousness. We don't really need to concern about whether we are going to have disclosure. We don't need to concern about whether artificial intelligence is evil or for good. We don't need to concern about any of those things. All we need to concern about is where is the consciousness at any given time. And that is what the energy transfer that we are going to do here today is purposed for. It's a unique way to help individuals to raise their consciousness, but also remove that density that's in the way of their full expression. Now, how this is expressed over the years, I've worked with a lot of light workers very closely over the years, and one thing that's happened is as they go through more this energy transfer process over a period of time, they start to become aware of why they're here, what they came here to do, what their gifts and abilities are, and as a result, they transition from their mainstream life path into something that is more higher vibrational. So all of us in this room have access to all this information in this higher dimension now, as well as everybody else out there in the world today. But the level to which you utilize that and are able to connect with and decipher and actually put that into functioning in your physical life depends on your ability to access that information. So as an example, in this room, there are all kinds of transmissions taking place. Every one of your cell phones is receiving signals. There are cellular towers, there's satellite transmissions, there's radio transmissions. All of your thoughts are existing in this space. But not everyone perceives all of that information. Somebody like Michaela and many of you who are channels may be able to tune into, let's say, the Pleiadians. Well, their information is in this space too, and so are the Arcturians, and so are everybody else. But in order to tune into any band of information, you have to match that frequency. So just because the information is in this room doesn't mean each of you knows that it's in this room, and each of you can use that information that's in this room. So raising consciousness and removing the density is going to broaden that access that you have to information that's already here as a result of this dimensional shift. So some of the side effects of this may be that you start to realize that you want to do something else with your life, and something that maybe you didn't realize was possible or that you even could do, but suddenly on the other side of this, those opportunities and the access comes to you, and you take the steps forward in that direction. This is what happens a lot of times around me. A lot of the light workers that I work very closely with, they start to open up to this awareness and step onto that path. So for many of you who may not already be on that journey, and even if you are, we can certainly broaden that access here today. But for those of you who are not, who want to be more in connection with that and to move in that direction, we can open that access to that today. Now, the more often you do this, the more beneficial it is, and I encourage you, if you find it beneficial, to use the videos from these events that are posted online. They're just as effective as being here in person at these events, although I've heard from people who've attended in person and say the intensity of the energy feels stronger here, but the effects are still there. Now, to back up for those of you who may be unfamiliar with this process before we actually do it, and by the way, I want this to be interactive, so if you have any questions about anything at all, feel free to step up to the mic and I'm happy to take them as we go. Anyone have any questions about anything so far? No? Okay. So the energy transfer is a two-part process, and so I've lived a very mainstream life until about 7 or 8 years ago. Always had a spiritual thread, but never really took it all that seriously because, much like many of you, I didn't really have people in my life to explain things that were happening in and around me. And this is certainly true for many of you, I'm sure, and also for a lot of the children being born today, although many of the children being born today are being born to more conscious parents, not in every case. But when they are, they do have access to more knowledge and information as to what's taking place. So I lived a very mainstream life, but a lot of very non-mainstream things happened around me in my lifetime that I only came to understand now in recent years, now that I'm following this path. So now this is my life, and my entire circle are individuals like you, and everybody that I work with is in this space. So I've entirely, with the rare exception of, as Michaela mentioned, Thanksgiving or things like that, or when you have to go to the Secretary of State to get a license renewal or something, right? Those are the times when I have to step into that world, but the rest of the time I'm entirely in this world. And so what I realized some years ago after I met Barb is that, and I met Michaela and we channeled on this question as well. There's a 13th dimensional collective, and many of you are working with multidimensional collectives. Some of you are probably aware of it already, but I can tell you a lot of the light workers I work with are not aware of it in the beginning. They only later become aware that they have been interacting with this 13th dimensional collective all along. Or rather a multidimensional collective. In my case, it happens to be a 13th dimensional collective. So there is a 13th dimensional collective that utilizes this physical structure to facilitate this process. My role in being here is simply that I had to prepare in other incarnations and into this one to be able to allow them a bridge from the 13th dimension into the third. So many of you are asking about disclosure. Part of the reason why these multidimensional beings can't exist here yet is because the Earth's vibration doesn't support that yet. And this is why a lot of hybrid children, or hybrid, or many of them are adults these days. I worked with a couple of hybrid children last year who are adults now. And the reason they're coming in hybrid form right now, and they look very much like the rest of you, but they have an awareness. So there was an individual who was actually in this audience last year or the year before, who I worked very closely with for a while, who had a memory of being dropped off here. And had a memory of being on the ship and his parents and all these interactions that took place. So they are walking among us now. And some of them are you. Maybe you don't remember yet, but some of them are, if not all of them, all of you in this room are probably in some way connected that way. Now, in my case, my connection happens to be 13th dimensional. And this collective is many beings, ascended masters, many extraterrestrial consciousnesses. And my role is to allow them to bridge between the third dimension and the 13th dimension, because they're not yet able to be here with us to facilitate this process. Now, what the process is they will send an energy from the 13th dimension to all of you here to raise your consciousness and your vibration. Now, the reason it also works on videos of events that are not live is because we have this skewed perception of time as human beings. In reality, all time coexists, and they can facilitate this process for you in non-linear time through a YouTube video of an event that we've done. Because from their vantage point, they can reach into any of our time, any of our linear time, to facilitate this as if it was happening in our real time. So videos can be used as well. But what they will do is they'll send an energy through my heart center to all of yours to raise your consciousness and vibration. And as I said earlier, as your consciousness expands, your access to this dimensional information of the fourth, the fifth dimension will increase, which may result in, and it does quite often occur, where people in the audience suddenly come into their spiritual abilities that they didn't know were there. Others, you may start seeing opportunities in your life that you didn't know were there before, and we'll step forward onto that path. So this is one of the most common things that's happened around me over the years, even not intentionally, because this collective does utilize this physical structure at their own, at will, without my conscious permission, because I gave them that permission upon incarnation. So we'll be doing that. But the other part is also another thing that's limiting human beings' access to a broader perspective of this dimensional space we're entering is the density that you're carrying in your energy field. Now, the density may come from human experience, traumas in this life. It could come from even experiences from other incarnations. It could be something from the collective. It can even come from genetically engineered foods or other kinds of environmental factors that may be creating an energetic density around your energy field. So normally those kinds of densities would take time to work through, sometimes lifetimes, sometimes not. But that density also is preventing the awakening of the collective and preventing your access to your full potential. Now, one thing that we've done over the years, in the beginning, now, I come from a mainstream background, as I said, prior to this period of my life, I was in the business and financial world. Even from a young child, I was entrepreneurial. And prior to doing this, I was a professional trader and owned a marketing agency, and that was my life. So I come from that, and you may see some aspects of my business background tomorrow, because I still do use PowerPoint sometimes. So this is my background. When I stepped into this phase of my life, it was a pretty radical shift to do that. And many of you are going to do that if you haven't already done so. And many of the people I work closely with, like Zane as an example, was a video game designer for how many years? A long time. 22 years. And now he stepped completely into a more spiritually based space. And this is what's happening with many people, but certainly people that I work closely with, this occurs, and you may have an experience like that yourself as a result of this process. So what I will ask you to do at a certain point soon is not only to be willing to accept this high vibrational energy that will be coming from this 13th dimension to all of you, to raise your consciousness, vibration. And if Barb, our friend who's the aura reader, was here, she can, and if you ever come to Michigan to one of our events, she can actually look at the room and see everybody's energy field beforehand. And she, to a great extent, is large part of the reason why I started doing this, because coming from a rational background, I needed to have some validation that something was actually happening. And I put her through a whole battery of tests to validate whether or not she was for real. And when I was convinced that what she was seeing was real, then I allowed her to be in the room to observe what was actually taking place. So to a great extent, that validation that I needed intellectually is the reason why I started doing this. And what she sees is everybody's aura expands when we do this process. And those who've been coming to our events on a regular basis in our local area, their auras are generally larger than the room as they're walking in. So it's a cumulative effect that does occur as a result of this. But I'm also going to ask you all to send your density to me. For those of you who are foreign to my process, that may seem a little weird or awkward because we're used to, in spiritual circles, the idea that we need to protect ourselves from each other. And we don't want to take on the negative energy of other people. I'm not saying that I don't generally agree with that concept, but I'm not saying that people are not sensitive to other people's energy. Certainly that's true. And some people are very hypersensitive. And when you're around denser energies, it can very adversely affect you. But what I will say is in my case, that's not the case. And so over the years that we've been doing this, through physical audiences, and any given point, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there are people using YouTube videos of events that I've done who are sending density to me. And it has no adverse effect on me personally. And as Barb has been in the room, she observes the density disintegrates as it hits my energy field. But the benefit to all of you is you don't have to carry it home with you. So now, everybody is a little bit different. Some of you may be very highly developed. Not that it's a good or a bad thing. May not have very much density. Some of you may not have come into this world with very much density to begin with. Others of you may have a lot of density. And depending on that, you may or may not release all of it. And it's not generally wise to release all of your density all at once if you have a lot of it. I've had some instances over the years where that's occurred to some degree, where I've done one-on-one with individuals and they clearly had a lot of energetic density, and the release of it was a little uncomfortable for them. So it's not always a good idea. Now this, as I've worked with this for the last many years, it sort of acclimated itself to each person's individual needs and process. So you won't release any more than you're ready today to do. And if you find it in any way beneficial, then continue that process, whether it's in person or using the videos, whatever that may be. One thing you need to keep in mind is no harm will come to me in the process of doing this. I've been doing this for a long time, and Barb can see, and if anything was harmful, she would be able to see that in my energy field as we're doing it. And over the years, I've done this not only in groups of people, like at our expo or events like this, but also with the collective consciousness. And in every case, she can see the density coming from all of the individuals to me, and it disintegrates as it hits my energy field. So the thing you need to keep in mind is that this is something that's going to be very beneficial for you, and you may be able to relieve yourself of lifetimes of karmic density in just one instance, which will expand your awareness and consciousness as well and give you access to a greater degree of who you are. Does anyone have any questions about anything? Yeah, come on up to the mics.
So the idea of toxicity, so is that like making an intention for that to leave the body? Is that your concept of density? Does that match with that?
Well, that's a good question. And first of all, to get into the process a little bit to answer that question, the 13th Dimensional Collective is already aware of, obviously, all of you in this room and your intentions. And they will facilitate the process for you. So you simply just need to sit there and be willing. That's all that's necessary. In fact, even my conscious awareness is unnecessary, which is why YouTube videos can be used at any time, and I have no idea it's being done. I will feel it though a little bit, so I usually know when it's happening, but I don't need to participate. I don't need to know that it's taking place. In the same way, all of you in this room had a conscious or an unconscious desire to be here today to facilitate this. So you brought yourself here for this, even though you may not have known why you brought yourself here. And they will facilitate that for you. So simply being here and being present and willing to participate is all that's necessary. Now, that having been said, if there's something in particular that's troubling you, or a particular trauma you've had in your life, or negative emotions around some issue in your life, you can certainly focus on those things, and you can visualize that intention as a dark cloud of energy and send it to me if you wish, but it's not necessary. Some people do have those kinds of things. They have a particular concern they feel very weighed down by, and they want to focus on that, but others don't really have that or don't really know what to focus on. And in that case, whatever density is present that you're ready to relieve yourself of today will just take care of itself. So when I use density can be, it's not necessarily a negative thing, it's just simply a vibration. But quite often density came from something that might have been a negative experience for you. So maybe you had a trauma as a child, and well, that trauma is long gone, but the density of the trauma may still be present in your energy field. And that density may be preventing or limiting or inhibiting your full awakening, your full development of your consciousness. And when that density is removed, you'll suddenly start seeing an opening up occur in your life where things that you didn't know were there might have been there all along, just like all the transmissions in this room that are taking place that you're not aware of. They were always there, but suddenly you can tune into and access information and awareness that you couldn't before. This is one of the most common things that people describe occurs after this process, is just a gradual increase of your happiness level. Now, the reason is when you have less density and a higher consciousness, your happiness level just naturally increases anyway. So it's not that enlightened masters on the planet never experience a negative emotion. Emotions are a factor of being human. If you're human, you experience emotions. The difference is that enlightened beings don't suffer. They may have emotions, but they don't suffer from their emotions. They may have a bad day or a bad moment or get angry, but in the next moment they're laughing and they forgot all about it. So suffering does not occur with enlightenment, but emotions will still occur. So as density is diminished and as consciousness raises, you may still laugh, you may still cry, you may still feel physical pain, but you won't suffer from those things. And this is part of the process that will occur from this. And a lot of people tell me they have an annoying husband or wife or whatever, and after this process, they can be screaming at them and it just doesn't faze them. So I'm not suggesting that you want to look for that, but certainly that I do hear that a lot, that there may be some family member or somebody in your life who causes you a lot of stress and strain, and after this, they can still be the same way, but you don't really feel the same effect from it because you're sort of vibrating above that at that point. So hopefully that answered the question. Anybody else have a question? Can you step up here, the microphone real quick?
Yes, so as we release karmic density today from our lineage, does it also release that density from our children?
Yes, it's a good question, because one of the interesting things, which I'm sure all of you have been exposed to in this group, is healing is not just within ourselves, because all of you probably have elements of your parents' genetics in your physiology, in your appearance, right? Some of you look like your fathers, some of you look more like your mothers, some of you may look like a little bit of both, but in a similar way, and science is starting to come to the same conclusion now too, which is one of the really interesting things about the time we're in now, is Science is starting to validate what we've always known spiritually, or that the mystics have been talking about for millennia. Science is starting to validate that within our genetics exists not only our physical characteristics, but also our emotional characteristics. So, one of the things is, there's, even to this day, people are still suffering over slavery, or still suffering over the Holocaust. And many people who never were even in the Holocaust are suffering over the Holocaust or slavery. But what we have to consider is that it's in their genetics. It's in their genes that their parents and their parents' parents suffered through this experience, and that information is still present in their genetics. And because of that information being there, they suffer as if they were there as well. So in the same way, we pass those genetics on to our children as well when we have children. So if we had a trauma, our children share that trauma, and they will carry that forward. They can certainly heal it, but they often are born with it. Now, it doesn't mean all children are doomed to suffer the traumas of their parents and their great-grandparents. Many children being born today, and I'm sure many in this, many of you in this room even, have the ability to dissolve that collective karma or trauma or genetic lineage because of the way you vibrate already. So not everybody whose parents had that is necessarily going to suffer that same situation, because many of us can process that. But this process will help to rewrite that pattern as well. So if you do have that in your lineage, it will do that. Now, with regard to children, if you have a trauma and you already have children versus you're going to have children. Now, certainly if you have a collective trauma or a genetic trauma or something that existed in your lineage, and you go through this process and then you have children, well, yes, those children are not going to have that. If you've already had children, then there's also that possibility, but the difference is that we don't know what each child's purpose in being here is. Sometimes children are here to learn and grow and evolve through a particular collective trauma in order to heal that for everybody. Many of the children being born today, one of the cool things for me is I get to be around very gifted, talented adult light workers and children too. These children are quite extraordinary, and many of them know that they're here to heal the collective trauma. So in their cases, they may be taking it on because that's their purpose. That we don't know. So, but what I will say is this process is not based on linear time. So let's say you had a trauma in a past life, and we address that now in this linear moment. It will ripple across to your other incarnations as well. So you will essentially heal your own lineage. And in the same way, you can heal the lineage of your children, with the exception of cases where the children may be here for a particular purpose. We're not here necessarily to, and I will say specifically, what I do here is not for physical healing, although it does happen sometimes. What I'm here to do is to awaken the collective consciousness of individuals. But when you make that big a shift in the vibration of somebody else, all kinds of things can change, because who you are today and whatever you look like, whatever physical issues you may have, are a product of how you vibrate. So the information for every illness is in this room, vibrationally, but also the information for perfect health is also in this room. Where you vibrate right now determines what aspect of that information you're tuning in. So if you have cancer today, you may not have cancer tomorrow, because your vibration tomorrow isn't the vibration that can tune in cancer. So in that sense, we can certainly rewrite those vibrations, and it does occur quite often. But to simple answer to the question is yes, that can happen, and quite often it does happen. But certainly you will rewrite patterns in your own lineage and in your own in the other incarnations that you've lived as well. Anyone else have any questions? Okay. So we can do the energy transfer, and then afterward we'll continue. Now, what I will say is every one of you is completely different from everyone else. You all look completely different, so your physical structures are different. And because your physical structures are different, you will all respond to the energy in a different way. Some of you may feel it, and hopefully the speaker doesn't go crazy, but some of you may feel it in some way, and that's quite common. Some people will feel vibration, others will feel temperature change. Some of you may cry for no explainable reason, others may laugh, that occurs too. Some of you may feel absolutely nothing. It doesn't really matter. Physical sensory experiences are great, but not having them is just as great. What we observed in our events that we've done in Michigan is Barb can see everybody's energy field changes regardless of whether they have a belief system around this or not. Sometimes somebody drags their engineering friend to our events who doesn't want to be there, who doesn't believe in any of this, but came anyway, and their energy fields change. Now, how that affects somebody who has no belief is, well, they will probably start believing in these things because now their consciousness is expanded, which means they have access to information that they didn't before. So they'll start being drawn to these ideas, these concepts, and people like this as a result of being in that environment, even though they had no belief before. So your belief is not required in this process, and whatever you feel or don't feel is perfectly fine. So we'll go through that process now, and I play a little music in the background, and hopefully the speaker on here doesn't decide to go crazy like that. So we'll do this process now, and we'll go for about 15 minutes. I play a little music in the background. As a friend of ours, Mark Romero, who's a high vibrational musician. If you came to the expo this year, you would have had an opportunity to meet him in person. But it's very conducive to this, and it'll help tune out some of the background noises. And what we're going to do is this two-part process, and I'm going to be sending a white light from this 13th dimensional collective. We'll be sending this energy through my heart center to all of yours, intended to raise your consciousness and vibration. Some of you, like I said, may feel the energy. Some of you may enter states of bliss, and some of you may have Kundalini experiences. These are all things that occur at our events when we do this. And at the same time, I'm going to ask you to trust the process if you're new to this, and send your density to me. If you would like to just sit there and do nothing but sit there, that's good. You can also focus on something in your life that you would like to work on or that you're concerned about, and direct that density toward me with just the intention, or visualize it as a dark cloud of energy and send it to my energy field. No harm will come to me in the process. Anybody have any questions before we begin? Okay. So just close your eyes and breathe comfortably. I'm going to play some music in the background. I'll go for about 10 or 15 minutes. I'll have my eyes closed as well. When we're done, I'll ask you to open your eyes. Just hold the intention to send any density to me. Some of you who have done this already may find it's hard to find density to send, which does happen sometimes, but just sit with it anyway. And keep doing that all throughout. At the same time, I'm going to be sending a white light from the 13th dimensional collective to all of your heart centers to raise your consciousness and vibration. Expand your energy field. And that'll be happening all throughout as well. So I'll play a little music now, and I'll be silent until we come back. Some of you may have felt that in certain ways, and others may not have. The benefits and effects will still be there. The most important thing is see how your life changes and how your perception of your reality changes in the days and weeks ahead. Sometimes it takes, depending on wherever your level of consciousness was before we began, it takes a little longer for those whose consciousness may be a little bit lower, who may have more density, versus somebody who's already farther along the path. The energy can assimilate a lot more quickly. So just observe your life and your interactions and in the time ahead, and that'll be a sign for you some changes taking place. Anyone have any questions or anything they want to share?
You may not like my question, but what it is see this beautiful group of people, they're here for both of you. What about no time limit, whenever it happens, bring the expo here, and we'll create a group of people to help. I just see it happening.
It may happen eventually, yes. Not the question I expected, but... Well, those of you who know my personal story, you know it was sort of a grassroots effort that started from nothing into something. And, years ago, it was only about maybe 7 years ago that I started this period of my journey. Prior to that, I was living a very mainstream life. And as many of you, and your question brought up that I forgot to give you all my disclaimer and give you the opportunity to leave the room before we started. It's too late now. So, because when you experience a very radical shift in consciousness and density, sometimes, depending on how much of a shift that was for you, things can fall apart the next day in order to rebuild as something new. So I do often get emails and messages from people all over the world whose life collapsed the day after an energy transfer and want to know what to do about it. Well, there's really nothing to do about it. It is just your vibration is so different that a new life is going to start forming around you that's more in alignment with who you are in that new moment. So, in a similar way, I had a significant consciousness shift about 7-8 years ago, and it coincided with my then life completely falling apart. So in my mainstream life, I was fairly successful in mainstream terms. I had money and things and successful businesses and things like that. And when that occurred, everything completely imploded. So I lost my businesses, my relationship, my money, and for a few years went completely broke, to where when we first started doing energy transfer events in Michigan, it was at the library because I couldn't afford to rent a venue to do the events. So we just did it for free in the library until the library kicked us out. And then we moved to another library and they kicked us out. And eventually got back to where we could afford to rent a venue. So the very first expo we did, I had no money. Now this is something important. I'm not sharing my story just to share my story. Many times when you experience a shift in consciousness and a change of vibration, your current life may no longer match. And the next day, everything may disintegrate in order for it to reassemble in some new form. And you may have to go forward in faith while that new form is coming together. So for me, when we did our very first expo in 2013, I had no money at all. The venue cost, the whole expo total was about $30,000 to $40,000. And I had no car, I had no money, couldn't buy groceries, barely. Gas was being cut off in the winter time, and electric and internet, and so all these things. This is the life I lived, and it's almost homeless. But anyway, for some insane reason, I decided to put on an expo, which I couldn't afford to do. And did it anyway, and miraculously, the first expo lost money, couldn't afford to pay it, but it worked itself out. Second expo lost even more money, but the bulk of which I owed to the hotel where we put it on. It was about $30,000, which I did not have, but the hotel went out of business, so that worked out. By the third expo, it still lost money, but I was starting to turn things around in my own life and work to where I could now afford to pay for it. Now we're planning our 8th expo next year, and it still loses money, right? So I'm the one financing it now myself, but I have the resources now to be able to do it. So the main reason we don't move the expo from place to place is, well, logistically, we're all there. Our main team is there. And from a cost perspective, it just makes sense right now to be there until we get a little bit more foundation. Now, I come from a business background, so I'm a little bit practical when it comes to things like that. We get requests to move this expo to Australia and all over the world, and I'm sure eventually we will do that. But for now, until at least it breaks even, we'll probably do it there. But not that Sedona isn't an amazing place to put it on, and probably in many ways a more appropriate place than Michigan. But in some ways, Michigan needs it more than you guys need it here. So, we're sort of one of the beacons of consciousness there in Michigan. Whereas Sedona, you're all consciousness here. You don't really need us in that sense. And we'd rather have you come out there and bring some of that light to Michigan anyway. So that's the main reason why we do a lot of things in our local area. We get requests to move our kids' programs to other parts of the world. And certainly the plan is in the long run to launch satellites of all of our programs around the world, including brick and mortar schools for kids that are more advanced than what's out there today. So this is a 30-year plan we've just barely started on, and we're just taking one little baby step after another. You will see us here eventually. But for now, you'll have to get on a plane and come see us in Michigan every year. What's that? Yeah, well, it was a good effort. It's a good effort. Anyone else?
I have 2 questions. You decide the order you want to ask. One is, do you also work with hybrid children? Is this part of your 30-year-old plan? And the second question is, can you also talk about crystalline light body activation as we move into 5D, and that what I think I experienced to some degree, what you're doing with your light transmission is supporting that process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, some hybrid children are hybrid adults now. And as I mentioned earlier, in the past couple of years, I've worked with a number of hybrid children who are not children anymore. And they're very talented, very gifted in their own unique ways, and many of whom have memories of being left here by their multidimensional families. So, they if you were to meet them, they look pretty human, but there's something a little bit different about them. They don't quite function here very well. Most hybrid children, whether they're children or adults now, they don't really quite relate to our way of living in mainstream 3D world. Many of them function well here in terms of, they have jobs, they work, they make money, but they don't understand a lot of our way of being with each other. They don't understand, not that we understand wars and things like that, but they understand those concepts even less and can't relate to those things. So in many ways, even money, although many of them can be successful materially, they don't really relate to the idea of having to have money. So yes, I work with hybrid children one-on-one nowadays who are adults. So a lot of my work with light workers, I have a light worker program where I work with adults to help them to transition from mainstream walks of life to more multidimensional walks of life. As I said earlier, a lot of those people are very successful in conventional fields like medicine like in case of video game designing and quite a few other things. Now, on the children's side of things, sure, a lot of the kids in our Conscious Youth program are hybrid children. I don't personally work with them very much. We have a facilitator who is an expert in that space, who is a teacher by training, and who's moved her work now into the multidimensional space. She's also somebody in my Lightworker program, so I work with her to move her in the direction of transitioning her mainstream teaching career into a multidimensional teaching career, where she now works with kids who are gifted kids, highly conscious kids, hybrid children, and so on. But she's the one who does that, and she organizes and runs those events. So my role is primarily as an overseer of the whole of the organization and all of its various projects and activities and keeping it moving forward. But there are many other incredible people who are doing their own thing in their individual areas of expertise inside of that. So I don't work with children per se these days, but I do, oversee and facilitate the kids' programs and such from a distance these days. Although we started it originally, Michaela and I, years ago, for her daughter, who's also quite gifted and quite talented. But she's not grown up, so now it's transitioned to serve many other children around the world and their parents as well. The other question about the crystalline activation, you said? I work with a lot of light workers, and everybody uses a different terminology for different things. So I don't want to get too caught up in the terminology, because the same terminology can mean the same thing with different terminology. Because not all of us have an understanding of what that is. But the simple answer to your question is yes, that is what's taking place. But some of you may perceive that in different ways. We're all connected to higher dimensions in varying degrees, and many of you in this room more than majority of people out there at the moment. But our physical structures tune in that energy differently. So let's say, for example, all of us in this moment are accessing fifth dimensional consciousness. That doesn't mean that it comes into you as fifth dimensional consciousness and comes out looking exactly the same. Everybody's structure is different. Your physical structure is different, your vibrational structure is different. Because of that, that fifth dimensional energy that comes in to each of you comes out looking completely different, because the filter of your own structure will turn it into something different in this reality. So, and I've observed this with many light workers, so any one of 10 people who are light workers, they're doing the same thing, but it may look different when it comes out. One person may be receiving a 13th dimensional energy, and like Michaela, may channel it into words that she can speak, and you can all intellectually understand what she's saying. Another person may be tuning in 13th dimensional energy, and it comes out as light language, which none of you know what that person's saying, but the vibration is nonetheless affecting you on a very deep level, and you'll go out of here permanently changed. Now, I may be tuning in 13th dimensional energy, and it's affecting you through this energy transfer process. So everybody's structure is different, and how that energy comes through into this reality will vary depending on that. But the simple answer to the question is yes, that is what's taking place in this space, is that, among other things, but yeah, in a very simple sense.
I'm not sure how to phrase this question, but I'm very curious to know how the money structure of our culture may change in terms of, and maybe that's all the question is right there, but trying to move towards a money not being the focus anymore. It's just a tool.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about that a bit tomorrow in more detail, but I'll address the question in a little bit more general term today. Well, a fifth dimensional consciousness, there is no money as we know of it today. But we're not there yet. We're in the third, moving into the fourth. So there's going to be this in-between space, which is where we're moving into now. Eventually, money won't be a factor. But, but before I talk about that, it's important to explain that money is not in and of itself an evil or a negative thing. Money is simply an energy that exists in this space. It's much like, I use the example of breathing a lot of times because I think it's a good illustration. So right now, I'm breathing in and breathing out air. So are each of you. But I'm not sitting here worried that each of you is going to suck the air out of the room and there won't be anything for me, right? Because I know there's plenty. I know that the air is about as infinite as it needs to be, that my next breath is always there. But many people in the world today treat money in a different way. They hold their breath because they're afraid, well, if I spend this money, what if the next money isn't there? What if I don't have money to buy the next thing? Or what if this person next to me makes more money than me and that sucks all the money out of the universe and there's nothing for me? So we envy others who have more money. We don't envy the person next to us who's breathing heavier than us, do we? Right? That's okay. So the problem isn't money, it's our perception around money. Because money is just simply source energy expressing itself in a slightly different form than air. It is there for our full expression in this human experience. We created it for us to have a means to exchange between each other. The problem is, and it's nobody's fault, the problem is our society has been structured in such a way that we hold our breath when we think of money, or we think it's limited when it's not. There are only a few people at the very top echelons of society who know that it's unlimited and who breathe it in and breathe it out. They don't hold their breath. They don't think a second thought about it. But the rest of us, because we were conditioned by our parents, by society, by advertising, to believe that it's limited and the next breath is not going to be there, we suffer because of it. I mean, imagine if in this moment you treated air like you treated money, you'd all pass out. Right? So money is not the problem. The problem is our perception around money, which to a great extent has been orchestrated upon us in order to create a hierarchical structure where the people at the top are the ones who breathe freely and the rest of us don't. It doesn't have to be that way. So one thing that has to change is our perception around money. If right now nothing changed but our perception around money, money would no longer be an issue. We would breathe it in when we needed it, we'd breathe it out when we didn't, and the universe would provide what we need. This is why years ago when I started this organization and I had no money, it still worked out. Because I felt compelled to do the things that I did, and even though rationally it made absolutely no sense, any rational person wouldn't have done what I did. But I did it anyway because there was something inside of me that felt compelled to do it. And so I did it, and the money just came. Or the circumstances worked out to where it wasn't necessary in order to do what I did. We perceive limitations in our lives based on how much money we have or don't have. That will change. It has to change. It will change. As we move to a fourth dimensional consciousness, this belief and perception will change. And with it will change the whole financial structure as well. A financial structure at the moment is orchestrated by a hierarchical system that controls not only the money and the money flow, but our beliefs around the money. The idea of debt and all of these things are created by this hierarchical structure. But in reality, you can't be in debt to source. So you can be in debt to a bank, but you can't be in debt to source. And source is where money comes from, not from the bank. The bank may print the notes that you use, and nowadays it's not even notes anymore, it's all electronic. And they manufacture that from thin air anyway, right? They understand the concept of money very well, but the rest of us don't. They know they can manufacture money from thin air with no value being behind it, as much as they want, and they never run out. They don't have to ask anyone's permission to do it. There's actually nothing wrong with that. They're simply practicing universal law. But the rest of us aren't, because we forgot that we can do that too. So now how the system is changing is there is this in-between space that we're moving into where that shift is occurring. And I'll talk about this in a bit more detail tomorrow. But one of the problems with the financial system is it's centralized. It's centralized and it's hierarchical, meaning there are central authorities that decide how much money is in society. They lend it out. They control the supply of it. And it's a hierarchical system with a few people at the top who make these decisions for everybody. It's not something that all of us get to have a say in. Well, as our consciousness expands and as we are moving into this fourth dimensional space, and we have access to this awareness, like, those of you today who went through this process, your awareness has shifted. You may not notice it yet, but you will start to notice it. And the whole collective is going through this as well, to a lesser degree than what happened today here, but still happening nonetheless. And as that happens, more and more of us are going to start moving into this understanding that source is not limited, source is not restricted. Just like the Federal Reserve understands they can print as much money as they want. They don't have to justify it to anyone. They don't have to have gold backing it. They can just do it. So can you. And if you're on the right path in your life, the universe will always provide for you what you need. So if you get on track to what you came here to do, even if you have nothing, much like me, at the time when I started this whole thing, it all worked out. And the universe will provide for you what you need, provided you're not holding your breath while doing it. Right? So if you're heading down this path and you're holding your breath because you know you're going to fail, you know you're not going to have enough money, then yes, you will fail and you will not have enough money. But if you go with it with openness and trust and faith that the universe will provide what you need to fulfill your mission here, then it will be provided. That doesn't mean, now, in the first year's expo that we put on back in 2013, and that was, Michaela and I were just starting out. She was, first time she channeled at the expo was that year. And leading into the expo, I knew I wasn't going to have enough money to pull it off. So I had her channel for me, and I asked the guides, am I going to have, are there going to be enough ticket sales to cover the cost of the expo? And the guides will never answer the question you want. They always answer the question you need to have answered, not what you want to have answered. And their answer was, the expo will happen. So the expo did happen, didn't make any money. Second expo, same question, will there be enough ticket sales to cover the costs? The expo will happen. And it did. I didn't know the hotel was going to go bankrupt and go out of business, but it did happen. And it didn't cost me anything to do it. So it was okay that nobody showed up. Third expo, I got smart and decided I'm not going to ask that question anymore. But eventually it just kept happening, right? And now it just works itself out. So although I had that concern, I also had faith and trust, but more importantly, I had this desire and drive to do this. It was never a question of, I can't do this. It was, I know this is something that I need to do and that I want to do, and that desire for doing it is what compelled me forward. Even if there were concerns about, I have no idea how I'm going to do this, that desire was the reason. So desire, in its purest sense, is absent of fear and restriction and limitation. If you can go forward with desire for what it is you're trying to create, then there isn't resistance in that, and money will show up. Now, as we as a collective move forward into this new future, of higher consciousness, there are structures that are coming into place already that are changing the financial system, that are making it more decentralized. And first of all, a lot of the main banking institutions are on the verge of collapse right now. So that's, the old system is starting to collapse. Many of them are on the verge of bankruptcy and failure. Of course, the government just bailed a bunch of banks out recently as well. But these things can only go on so long. The system is starting to be very fragile. But at the same time, there is the move toward a decentralized financial system that's taking place in the background as well, with the movement toward cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and things like that. Majority of cryptocurrencies, not all of them, are decentralized. They are not government created. They are not controlled by the government. They are not held by banks. They're not issued by banks. There are some that are now, but the majority are not. And there are always going to be some that are, but as we go forward, that's not going to be the case. So one of the biggest issues of the financial system is it is controlled by a centralized hierarchical system. Cryptocurrencies are not. It is the first financial system that has existed in our modern history that is not controlled by a centralized authority. So that is showing us that we're moving in a direction where the people are taking control or are becoming more empowered in their financial well-being. So that's taking place. Now, a lot of what I'm going to talk about tomorrow is we are moving into somewhat of an Atlantean society in the next several decades. And not only in huge mass awakenings taking place and people coming into their spiritual gifts and incredible children coming into the world with extraordinary missions and spiritual abilities, but also huge innovations, technology, health, everything. These things are already happening now. I'll give you some examples tomorrow. But it's only going to continue to accelerate as we head into this future. And as that occurs, we are going to start making shifts in the financial system toward that direction as well. One of the things that comes up a lot is, well, when this occurs, where are people going to work? Where's the money going to come from? A lot of countries in the world right now are experimenting with a universal basic income. I don't know if any of you heard of that, but universal basic income, which again, our consciousness right now is at a third dimension going to fourth. We don't want a government that is in a third dimension issuing universal basic income, because that's going to be socialism. But if we move into a fourth dimension and governments start issuing a universal basic income, that's going to be a better system, and that's not going to be a socialist system. It's not. So universal basic income is an income baseline that everybody will receive just for simply being in that country. And it will be different for every country depending on how much money does a person need in that country to have a good life and provide all their basic needs without having to work anywhere. So this is something that's now being tried all over the world as an experiment to see, does it work? Will it work? And that is one of the things that I think will come into being as we go into this fourth to fifth dimensional space, is eventually the end result is that money cannot be a limitation in our existence here. As we move toward closer and closer connection with source consciousness, where we all have access, greater and greater access to source, there cannot be limitations in this reality, because source doesn't restrict. Governments restrict, our modern society restricts us from source, but source itself does not restrict. So as we raise in consciousness, those restrictions in society cannot exist. Doesn't mean money won't exist in some form, but the restrictions around money will not exist. And this is the next step. Having a universal basic income is probably what we're going to do in a tangible way on Earth to move from where we are now to the next step, which is everybody has enough money to have a good life. And then if they want to work, they can.